To most people, Julius Caesar is remembered as the brilliant general who conquered Gaul, the dictator who defied the Senate, or the tragic figure betrayed by his closest allies. His name echoes through history as a symbol of ambition, power, and destiny. Some call him a hero of the people, others a tyrant who destroyed the republic. In popular imagination, he is larger than life, a man of glory, betrayal, and blood, immortalized in marble statues and dramatic tales that emphasize his triumphs and his downfall. Yet behind this legendary image lies another Caesar, one rarely discussed, a man drowning in debt, gambling everything on power. His rise was not built on military genius alone, but financed through staggering loans from Rome's wealthiest men. Beneath the grandeur of his victories was a desperate struggle to balance accounts, repay creditors, and secure influence. You talk about the money that drove him, but it is here in the hidden financial biography of Caesar that the true story begins. Welcome to the financial biography, where wealth, ambition, and legacy converge, and every fortune tells a deeper story. Caesar's rise was not built on military genius alone. It was financed, and the scale of his borrowing was staggering. Elections in Rome demanded lavish spending, games, feasts, and spectacles that won the hearts of the people but drained the purses of candidates. Caesar poured money into these displays, dazzling crowds with entertainment that made his name unforgettable. Yet behind the applause stood creditors, men who demanded repayment with interest. Chief among them was Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, who became Caesar's lifeline. At one point, Caesar's debts were so crushing that creditors threatened to strip him of his office. His governorship in Spain was not a reward, but a desperate escape, a chance to earn enough spoils to silence his lenders. Even there, the shadow of debt followed him, pressing claims threatening humiliation. Imagine a Roman governor chosen to rule a province, yet hounded by creditors as if he were a common debtor. For Caesar, conquest became necessity. Victories brought booty, land, and tribute, each campaign a calculation to balance the books. Spain taught Caesar a lesson that would shape his destiny. If he could not buy power with coin, he would mint it with victories. Every triumph was a payment plan, every conquest a ledger entry. He repaid, regrouped, and recalibrated, not toward peace, but toward Gaul. Gaul was not just a theater of war. It was an investment Rome's northern frontier offered to treasures, glory, and gold. Caesar marched not merely to defeat tribes, but to liquidate liability. Spoils were catalogued, hostages leveraged, and land redistributed to loyal veterans. His army became a machine that produced both allegiance and revenue. The devotion of his legions was secured not only by glory, but by coin bonuses and promises of farmland. Caesar transformed conquest into currency, and with every campaign he bought himself freedom from debt and loyalty from men who would follow him anywhere. His reports from Gaul, the famous Commentarii di Bello Gallico, were more than propaganda. They were performance statements. To Rome, each dispatch reassured creditors, rivals, and the public that Caesar was solvent, strong, and inevitable. The man who had once begged for loans now commanded the currency of prestige. Yet this power terrified the Senate. They saw a man who had escaped the chains of debt and built an empire of loyalty funded by conquest. What happens when a debtor becomes Rome's greatest creditor? He becomes an institution unto himself, and the Republic could not tolerate institutions that refuse limits. Caesar's debts made him dependent. His victories made him dangerous. The Senate watched as his popularity and purse swelled, fearing the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. In Rome, that was more than personal. It was structural. Senators leveraged influence like assets. Elections were investments. Alliances were derivatives of favor and obligation. Caesar's partnership with Crassus and Pompey, the first triumvirate, was not born from affection but necessity. 3 men, 3 power bases. One calculus combined to control Rome's markets of votes and laws. Fine ends was the glue that held their alliance together, and Caesar's financial desperation was the spark that made it possible. Caesar read Rome's balance sheet: swelling poverty, land monopolized by elites, veterans aging into destitution, grain prices rising with unrest. He did not merely campaign. He audited Rome, sold his reforms: land for veterans, debt relief measures, grain distribution were not just kindness, but corrections, attempts to rebalance a system collapsing under its own weight. For the elite, this was intolerable. Redistribution threatened their estates, their privileges, their control of Rome's wealth. Fine arts became philosophy. Who deserves the wealth of Rome? The few who inherited it, or the many who built it? There's a moment when financial anxiety becomes political violence. The men who feared Caesar did not fear his words. They feared his recalculations. If the Republic's wealth could be reallocated by a single will, then the old world's insurance, the Senate itself, was worthless. Senators imagined a future where their estates shrank. Their debts were forgiven by fiat. The influence diluted by a leader who spoke to the masses with accounts rather than oration. Assassination in this framework reads not only as ideology, but as risk management. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he did more than defy a law. He reconciled a ledger Rome had forced him to choose: return and be reduced, or advance and claim what conquest had earned. The decision was framed as treason, but in Caesar's mind it was solvency. He could not allow rivals to confiscate his gains, disband his forces, and audit his life back into dependence. He walked into history because retreat meant bankruptcy. The bankruptcy of power. Ali I acta est. The die is cast was not just a gambler's flourish, but a financier's declaration. What happens when a debtor becomes Rome's greatest creditor? Caesar's accounts flipped. He paid not with coin, but with stability. He offered predictability to a city addicted to chaos. He restructured calendars, streamlined administration, stabilized grain supply, and rewarded service with land. He was refining Rome's operating system, an optimized response to systemic inefficiency. Yet optimization threatens incumbents. Stability under one man looks like tyranny. To those whose wealth depends on volatility, they control. The more Caesar balanced Rome's finances, the more he unbalanced Rome's hierarchy. In boardrooms and bathhouses, whispers grew: if Rome's cycles could be tamed, then the old game was over. Caesar's clearest insight may have been this: Rome's crisis was not a sequence of bad leaders, but a structure that made death a way of life. Elections demanded expenditure. War repeated privilege captured the surplus. He sought to interrupt the loop. Interruption is expensive. It requires courage, speed, and the acceptance that every reform makes enemies. His enemies did not lack courage. They lacked imagination. They believed the assassination would restore balance. Instead, it shattered the instrument. The Republic did not return. It broke irreversibly, and in the fragments, an empire rose after Caesar. Rome did not resolve its debts. It centralized them. Augustus built a system that turned imperial power into a budget. The lesson was cold but enduring. If you cannot trust the market of elites to manage a state, you build a state that manages elites. In the end, the man who began as a borrower became the reason Rome stopped pretending that debts were private matters. Under the shadow of his life, Rome learned that money is never neutral. It arranges loyalty, draws maps, and chooses which stories survive. Caesar's financial biography is the hidden ledger behind the collapse of the Republic. Debt had propelled him to greatness, but it also set the stage for betrayal. His story reminds us that empires fall not only by swords, but by the weight of their accounts. Rome's economy was built on expansion, and for centuries this model seemed unstoppable. Conquer new lands, seize wealth, and feed the machine of empire. This was the rhythm of Roman prosperity. But when expansion slowed, cracks began to appear in the foundation. The spoils of conquest no longer flowed as freely, and the Republic struggled to sustain its appetite. Inequality widened as the rich grew richer, while ordinary citizens sank deeper into debt. The Senate clung to privilege, refusing reforms that might ease the suffering of the masses. Caesar recognized these fractures and sought to address them with populist reforms. Land redistribution promised veterans and the poor a stake in Rome's future. Debt relief offered hope to those crushed under obligations they could never repay. Grain subsidies ensured that hunger would not drive unrest in the streets. These measures were not simply acts of generosity. They were attempts to stabilize a system on the brink of collapse. Yet to the aristocracy they were threats. Every reform shifted wealth and power away from the elite, undermining their grip on Rome's fortunes. The Senate viewed Caesar not only as a political rival, but as a financial disruptor. His policies challenged the very structure of Roman society, where wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few families. Redistribution was seen as theft, debt relief as betrayal, and subsidies as dangerous pandering. The elite feared that Caesar's vision would dismantle their privileges and rewrite the financial order of the Republic. In their eyes, his rise was not just ambition, but revolution, and revolutions are rarely tolerated by those who benefit from the status quo. His assassination was therefore not only political, but financial. The daggers in the Senate were wielded against a man who dared to alter the balance sheet of Rome. By killing Caesar, the conspirators believed they were protecting their estates, their wealth, and their influence. They imagined that by removing him, they could restore the old order. But the act of violence did not heal the Republic. It shattered it. The financial tensions that had driven Caesar's reforms did not vanish with his death. Instead, they deepened, pulling Rome further into instability. Rome fell because it could not reconcile ambition with justice, wealth with equality. The Republic had become addicted to conquest, unable to sustain itself without new lands to plunder. When expansion slowed, the imbalance between rich and poor grew unbearable. Caesar's attempt to correct this imbalance was met with resistance so fierce that it ended in blood. His death marked the failure of reform and the triumph of fear. The Republic collapsed not because Caesar was too powerful, but because Rome was too fragile to change. The birth of empire was the unintended consequence of his assassination. In killing Caesar, the Senate hopes to preserve the Republic, but instead they destroyed it. The vacuum of power invited chaos, civil war, and ultimately, the rise of Augustus. The system that had resisted reform was replaced by one that centralized authority in a single ruler. Rome traded the illusion of republican freedom for the stability of imperial control. The financial order Caesar had threatened was gone, replaced by a new structure that bound wealth to the will of the emperor. Philosophers later reflected on this moment as a turning point in history. Was Caesar a tyrant undone by ambition, or a reformer destroyed by greed? His words echo through time. Men willingly believe what they wish. The Senate believed they could preserve their privileges by ending his life. The people believed Caesar could deliver them from poverty and debt. Both beliefs collided in the Forum, and the result was the death of the Republic. Rome's fall was not a single event, but the culmination of illusions, debts, and betrayals. Caesar's death marked more than the end of a man. It marked the end of an era. The Republic, once proud of its balance of power, had become a battlefield of wealth and ambition. The empire that followed was built on the ruins of failed reform and the blood of its greatest general. Rome's story reminds us that financial structures are as fragile as political ones. When inequality festers and reform is resisted, collapse becomes inevitable. Caesar's ghost lingers as a warning. Empires fall not only by swords, but by the weight of their accounts. Caesar himself once said, "It is better to create than to learn." Creating is the essence of life. His life was creation of armies, of power, of debt. Yet creation built on fragile foundations cannot last. Philosophers ask, was Caesar a victim of fate or a financial necessity? Did ambition destroy him, or did debt dictate his destiny? His story forces us to confront whether greatness is born of vision or of desperation. Another of his words haunts us. Men willingly believe what they wish. Rome believed it was eternal, that its wealth and power would never fade. But death told another story, whispering of fragility beneath the marble. The Republic collapsed under the weight of its illusions, blinded by its own myths. Caesar's rise and fall revealed the danger of believing in permanence when the balance sheet said otherwise. Rome's faith in eternity was its undoing. Philosophers debate whether Caesar was a tyrant or a reformer, but the truth may lie in the arithmetic of his age. His debts were not just personal burdens. They were reflections of Rome's systemic imbalance. The Republic was addicted to conquest, and Caesar embodied that addiction. His victories were repayments. His reforms were recalculations. His death was the final audit. In this sense, Caesar was not only a man, but a mirror held up to Rome itself. Consider the paradox. Caesar's ambition gave Rome stability. Yet his ambition also destroyed the Republic. His reforms promised justice, but they threatened privilege. His victories enriched Rome, but they deepened inequality. Was he a savior or a destroyer? Perhaps he was both, because in financial biographies, creation and collapse are often two sides of the same coin. His destiny was written not only in blood, but in debt. The thrill of his story lies in its repetition across history. Empires rise on ambition, expand on conquest, and collapse under the weight of inequality. Debt is the silent architect of power, shaping decisions, alliances, and betrayals. Caesar's ghost whispers that money is the true sword of history, sharper than steel, more enduring than armies. His life reminds us that financial necessity can drive men to greatness and to ruin. His words echo into our age. Experience is the teacher of all things. Caesar's experience was forged in debt, sharpened in war, and sealed in betrayal. The Republic learned too late that ignoring financial imbalance leads to collapse. Modern societies to risk repeating Rome's mistakes, believing wealth eternal while inequality festers. Caesar's biography is not ancient history. It is a warning written in stone and blood. And so we end with a chilling reflection. History repeats: debt, ambition, betrayal. The cycle continues from Caesar's Rome to our modern world. The financial biography of power is never simple. The corridors of power still echo, with whispers of balance sheets and debts unpaid. Caesar's ghost lingers, reminding rulers that the fate of empires is not only in battles but in ledgers. The final lesson is stark: money shapes destiny. Armies march because they are paid. Alliances form because they are financed. And empires fall because their debts outweigh their dreams. Caesar's life was proof that ambition without balance leads to collapses. Ghost still whispers in the corridors of power, warning that the true empire is not built on marble or steel, but on the fragile trust of wealth. If this opened your eyes, don't forget to subscribe. Finance holds the stories, and I'll guide you through them.